Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Her Hoop Stats podcast. I'm Chelsea Lay, and I am joined today by Coach Helen, and we are going to get into some of the week's best WNBA performances, stories, and everything else. And, just off the top, if you're not subscribed to the Her Hoop Stats podcast, make sure to subscribe below, comment, let us know what you liked from the episode, follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, wherever you listen to your podcast or engage with women's basketball content, we're there and we're ready to chat with you. But for now, we're going to chat with Coach here and talk about a few of the best storylines and a few of our favorite things from the WNBA this week. Let's get started with maybe one of the biggest stories the other day, which was Paige Bueckers getting her first WNBA win as the Dallas Wings won against the Connecticut Sun in Connecticut, an arena and a state that Paige Bueckers is very used to performing in. And that helped when it came to her getting a career high in points, in assists. And also I saw a stat on ESPN the other day that said she is the first WNBA rookie to score 60 points with 30 assists in her first 5 WNBA games, which, I mean, breaking records and, doing it in a state that she's played a lot of basketball in. So, what did you think about that Dallas performance when they finally, get a win, and what did they do right to be able to get that?
Yeah, I have been talking about Coach and what they didn't do for the last few games. But first of all, Paige has been consistent and solid, from her first game. I don't think she's played a bad game. She's played like a rookie, but I think she's been solid. Where I had some concerns was that Arike had not been scoring like she's capable of scoring. And I mentioned that she rarely got the basketball at a point in time in the shot clock where she could work her magic. And yesterday I'm watching the game and they made a couple of changes where she got the ball earlier in their progressions. So she had an opportunity to get some rhythm, if you will, with the ball in her hands. And so whenever she gets the basketball in her hands, everyone on defense has to pay attention to her. They don't know what she's going to do. And I thought that worked out well for some other folks on the team, Dejanay Carrington and Paige as well. But more than anything, it allowed her to get a rhythm, which is something that I think she had not been able to get in the previous games because she didn't touch the ball enough. It's not like she has to take every shot, but I do think she needs to touch the ball. And you could just tell she felt in a better rhythm. She was putting up 3-point shots like she normally does with a quick release or making things happen for other people, including Carrington and Maddie Segrist as well. And I just thought it flowed better. And she just seemed to play better. I mentioned that she didn't, in these first few games, she didn't have bad body language. She was trying to do what was supposed to be done within the offense. It wasn't like she was rebelling or anything like that, but her body language was even better because she was in more of a rhythm. And I think that worked well for the team. But also, they played really good defense. Arike had 6 steals, and I think that was helped her get some rhythm as well because she saw the ball go through the basket.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we said last week when we talked that, it'll take a little bit of time, but Dallas definitely has the pieces to be able to, put what they have together. And I think Connecticut was a great opportunity for them to play a little bit more freely, just given that, playing against Connecticut these days isn't like playing against Vegas or New York. It's a little bit less pressure because they don't have the level of talent that some of these other teams have. They're kind of in a rebuild right now. And I think just like being able to get used to, I feel like every time we watch Paige, she gets a little bit more like calm, a little bit more used to the speed of the game. She's being able to read the other team's defense a lot better, and you can see that through the passes she's making to her teammates. And I think I think they need to find a balance, like we've been saying with Arike and the other parts of their offense that they've been trying to implement. It's a new team, new coach, first-time head coach, all of that, and I'm sure you can attest to that, that it just takes some time to, get a system going and, figure out what everybody's pros and, specialties are, so it definitely was great to see them get into, that kind of rhythm and be able to play with a lot of power and they just felt like they were playing a lot more free.
Yeah, I do agree that they need balance, but where I look at the way I look at it is you get that balance from Enrique having the ball in her hands.
Yeah.
And again, not taking every shot, but making everyone pay attention to her. And I think Paige is she never from her first game never looked like a frantic rookie. She
Mhm.
just looked like when she started just trying to observe and figure things out and figure out where how she can get to be the type of player she is within this new environment, within this new level. Obviously, physically, she has those skills, and I think mentally she seems more comfortable on the floor. But I don't think you can get a rhythm for that offense without Enrique touching the ball early in the offense. And she may not take the shot, but she opens it up for everyone else, and that helps with the balance, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and, I mean, Enrique's numbers haven't been the best, but like I say sometimes there's no better way to go than up, hopefully, and so, with the ball in her hands more, I agree, she can I think we've talked about this again last week too, but she's such a high volume shooter that sometimes you just have to kinda give up some of those shots. I mean, Caitlin Clark is kind of the same. They're throwing up a lot of shots. They're going to make a lot of them, but the percentages might not be the best just because that's the way they play. They just, they're trying to high volume shoot and see how much can go in. And so when she starts feeling the rhythm, it'll definitely be beneficial for Dallas. And the more confident Paige becomes as both, you know, a playmaker, a passer, and then being able to get the ball in late clock situations from Enrique and be able to work with whatever defense she has on her will definitely benefit them as well. But that game was a few days ago. So let's get into the sole game of last night's schedule, which was Indiana versus Washington. And I mean, this one was a little bit interesting, obviously, given I'm sure if you're watching this at the time, you know that Caitlin Clark was deemed out for the next 2 weeks. That was about on Monday. So we're about halfway through the first week of that injury timeline. She has a strained quad, which don't worry is not life threatening for anybody who has been acting like it is. But she's going to be back in a few weeks. It's one of those injuries that I've heard from friends in the healthcare system that it just needs time and can be really tricky because it can feel a little bit better and then you get back too early and you end up aggravating it again, which I think is why they're trying to give her the full 2 weeks to rest it out and make sure that she's not going to be in and out of the lineup all season. And it actually, the timing worked out for them a little bit better, but they also didn't win last night. So, they play Washington twice in the stretch. They'll also play, I believe, Connecticut. And then, around the time that Clark is supposed to be back, they'll play Atlanta and then get into a harder schedule. So I think now is the right time to kind of rest her and make sure that she's better for when those teams come along. But they did play their first Caitlin Clark-less regular season game last night. It technically was a home game for Washington, but they played it in Baltimore at a bigger arena. Um, and so, yeah, the Washington Mystics end up getting the win. They led for most of the game as well. Were able to get, give themselves a pretty decent lead at some points, and then in the end, Indiana just couldn't mount the comeback and be able to make it like a one possession game at the end. But yeah, Washington wins another impressive game. I think on their road game or on their road trip that they recently had, they struggled a little bit with closing. And I was curious as the game was kind of trickling down last night if they would be able to close out or if Indiana would come back, through Dewana Bonner, who had a great game, or some of the other offensive pieces in Indiana that are able to score a lot. But what did you take from that game, especially, missing a piece like Clark for the first time?
Well, one of the things I took was that it's really difficult when Caitlin is not in there in terms of spacing because you have to pay so much attention to her so far out. She stretches the defense, and
Yeah.
you're able to do some things. That was one thing. She and Aaliyah Boston have developed this tremendous chemistry on the pick and roll in the middle of the floor because
Yep.
you have to pay attention to both of them. So those 2 things were not there, and I think that's what part of the reason that it caused Indiana not to have rhythm. Now, I said without her earlier in the week that it wouldn't need to be one person replacing her, it would be by committee, and that people would just have to do more of what they've already been doing. So you had Howard with 11 points, you had Tiffany Mitchell with 14, you had Bonner with 21, but Aaliyah Boston only had 10 points. And
Mhm.
so that was a struggle. And since she was not there to stretch the floor, I felt like they were forced to do a little bit more one-on-one, but not with enough space to do one-on-one on offense. So I think
Yeah.
they struggled with that, and you do have to give the Mystics some credit, for their defense. I think the Mystics, the quote unquote others, have pleasantly surprised me. Olsen, Sutton, Melbourne, which a lot of people don't talk about, are starting to play really well in their roles in terms of contributing to the offense of the Mystics. And so those were just a couple things that I thought stood out to me about both teams.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, like you said, having a player like Caitlin out doesn't just affect the scoring, but she's also such a good facilitator, and with that pick and roll, I mean, Indiana was outscored 48 to 32 in the paint, which you would think with Caitlin Clark being like a backcourt player that that wouldn't take such a hit, but she's so good at, dumping the ball into her post players and letting them work that, maybe that was an effect of her being out as well, not being able to have that flow between her and Boston or between her and Bonner. And yeah, like their defense. I mean, I've definitely thought, their defense is probably the biggest thing that they have to work on this year, just given that um, you know, it's one of the parts of Caitlin's game that needs a little bit of work in comparison to say her offense or her shooting, assisting, etc. But I mean, the Fever players other than Bonner combined to shoot I think it was 3 for 17 from beyond the arc. Obviously, another big thing with Caitlin out is going to be the three-point shooting. So that obviously suffered. And then, yeah, the starters went 3 for 13 collectively. But yeah, they just struggled on both ends of the floor without Caitlin. They struggled. I mean, I think we're at the point now where people maybe aren't, what's the word I'm looking for? Like sleeping on Washington as much anymore. Because they're proving that they're a really tough, really energetic team with all these young players. I mean, Kiki Iriafen and Sonia Citron have been absolutely crushing it. Even last night, Iriafen had 16 points, 8 rebounds, and Sonia Citron had 13 and 7, which I mean, for rookies, it's the same as, we're talking about Paige Bueckers. They're getting out there. They're not afraid of the moment. They're not, I guess, kind of, um, what's the word? I'm like not being able to talk today. Wow. They're not,
They're unafraid and
frazzled.
unbothered.
There you go.
Unafraid and
Unafraid and
unbothered.
unbothered. That's a good way to put it. And they're able to just like take these moments. And I think what's happening in Washington is that as a result, Shakira Austin isn't really getting as many minutes, and she's been in and out with injury as well. But she did play last night. She had 13 points and 8 rebounds off the bench. She played about 15 minutes. But Yuri Fen has just been coming out, taking that starting role, absolutely just like being able to run on offense. She's so fast. I saw a play last night where she there was a mismatch between her and Sid Colson, and she just took advantage of it and barged her way into the hoop and was able to get the basket and kind of, put Sid Colson on skates a little bit. But I think another huge factor for the Mystics as well is Brittany Sykes, who led again with 21 points last night. And having that mix, I think they did what Chicago was trying to do, and having this mix of these really strong young players and these good, anchoring veterans in, Austin, you can consider one, Sykes, Dolson, who are really anchoring these younger players. And I think what Chicago was trying to do is kind of what Washington maybe wasn't trying as hard, but ended up doing. And so, yeah, I don't think I expected Indiana to be as frazzled without Caitlin Clark, because they do have a lot of really high championship level players. But I was a little shocked to see that they weren't able to mount a comeback. They weren't able to take advantage of the fact that Washington has struggled to close in recent weeks. And then on the flip side, I mean, Washington just continues to impress me in terms of a young team that we weren't really talking about before the season, and now are just kind of these like fun, young, energetic players that make watching a game so entertaining.
Well, I think the thing for Indiana is you can't control the fact that Caitlin isn't there on offense, but
Mhm,
you can control your defense regardless
mhm,
of who was on the floor with communication and movement. And the thing that stood out to me was that they had 0 fast break points. And
mm,
so that is something that you create with your defense that makes it a little bit easier to get a rhythm on offense. And when you don't play good defense, you don't get those opportunities. And that is something that I think is what they're going to have to hang their hat on until Caitlin gets back because they don't have anybody that's really spacing the floor like her. The
yep,
other young lady, Lexi Hull, can shoot,
yep,
obviously. She can stretch the floor a little bit, but Caitlin stretches it in a different way than everybody else. And so if
yeah,
you're not going to have that kind of space, first of all, you've got to execute whatever Stephanie White draws up almost flawlessly because you have very little margin for error, but you have no margin for error, I think, on your defense, which can create easy shots, layups, and people get into a rhythm because they're seeing the ball go through the basket, getting to the free throw line from transition. Those are things that you can control, and it doesn't matter who's on the floor. And so I think Indiana's going to have to hang their hat on that until they can figure something out on offense without Caitlin.
yeah. It's definitely hard, I think, obviously you can't control when players get injured, it's a normal part of the game and, you know, something that you just have to kind of be ready for regardless. So, it's definitely interesting, to see how I mean, they play Washington again in just like, a few games. I think they have one game in between and then they'll play Washington again at home, which will be helpful. But I'm excited to see how they kind of figure it out again against them and are able to be able to tighten up uh both their offense and their defense. And I mean, it's hard, like you were saying, like you have to defend Caitlin Clark basically before she even crosses half court because she can just pull up and shoot wherever. But being able to take advantage of some of the other shooters, I mean, they do have a lot of shooters. They have Lexi Hall, they have Sophie Cunningham,
Yeah,
who can shoot. Sid Coulson can shoot every once in a while. You have, Joanna Bonner, who's like a very versatile player and can definitely shoot a little bit outside of, just kind of the range of under the basket. So they have options, and I think maybe with a bit more time to practice without Clark, because she was deemed out on Monday, and then they play Wednesday, right? So plus you're traveling, et cetera, et cetera. So they probably didn't have as much time to practice without her as they wanted to. So, I mean, I don't see them having these exact struggles for the entire stretch that she's out.
well, that's what makes the defense so much more important because you
Hmm.
can be consistent with that regardless of who's in the game, and you can create enough offense from that to make up. They didn't have any huge leads. The Mystics didn't, so
Hmm.
I really feel like that's something that they need to focus on. And the offense will come, but the defense is something that's way in your control. And I think when they're looking at playing the Mystics again, they are so good at spacing and cutting. I think if you want to disrupt them, you can't let them make their entry passes.
Right.
That's to me really what gets them started, whether they're cutting up to the free throw line or standing outside with the Princeton offensive elements. If you stop them from making their entry passes, then it's going to disrupt their offense. So we'll see, but they're very good at it, and I think Brittany Sykes is the glue for that team. You can see when she's not in there, they struggle a little bit, not from a lack of talent, but just that presence, that calming presence, and the
Yeah.
aggressiveness offensively when they need it, when they need a bucket.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, yeah, you're talking about the players on the post, just thinking about the fact that they have Iriafen, Austin, Aaliyah Edwards, Steph Dolson, like that being their core. And I mean, Andy wrote in today's article, he said, the biggest flaw in the Fever's defense has been the inability to keep opponents off the line. Indiana has the league's third highest foul rate, incurring the officials' wrath on 23.3% of plays, including offensive fouls. So that's another thing when you're talking about post players is the fact that you need to keep people off of the free throw line, because again, in these, 5-point game situations at the end, that's what's really going to get you is these free throw points that these players are able to get. Um, and if you're fouling so much, not only does that take your key players out of the game because you have to sit and manage time with foul trouble, but then these teams are getting all of these extra points that in the end, again, when you're winning by 5, 6, 7 points, that kind of is the factor.
Well, what that tells me is you're not listening and executing the game plan on defense, because if you're
Mm,
sending people to the line, that means you're late and allowing them to get wherever they want to go. And
mhm,
then you end up fouling them. And you're not communicating on defense. There are only so many teams in the WNBA, and so pretty much everybody at some point here in the next 2, 3 weeks, there's not gonna be much people don't know about other teams, and so then it becomes a
yes.
matter of execution on the defensive end and not being late, not allowing people to cut, not allowing the post players to get to the spot where they want in transition, any number of things on the defensive end to keep them off the line.
Yeah, and I mean, another fun fact here from Andy's article is that, Fever opponents are averaging 24.8 attempts per game from the free throw line, and, I mean, the Mystics are one of the teams that are worse than them, but then you have this game here where it ends up being, a little bit uneven there, so, I mean, nearly 25 attempts from the free throw line per game is a lot, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But again, it's just the communication, and I said this about Vegas and the other teams, like, this isn't anything that's rocket science. It's an
Mm,
easy conceptually, I should say, it's an
mhm,
easy fix, but to get everybody on the same page, and sometimes when you're playing around with those rotations, when you have a situation like Caitlin Clark's not in there, you play a player that's maybe someone that you wouldn't have in there all the time on both ends. Their
mhm.
contribution is more on one end or the other, and then when you have to put new rotations in there and someone's forced to play on both ends, one's not their forte, that can, mess up with your rhythm on the defensive end as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, I mean, we're talking about things like free throws and defense, and sometimes these are one things that can't be statistically tracked as well as offensive stats in terms of points, assists, etc. And then free throws that people tend to forget about quite a lot. But I mean, in your head, as a coach, like I want to kind of throw this out, like from your perspective, if you're a coach and you have a team that is doing all the things that you've been saying over the past few minutes. They're, you know, not following the game plan defensively. They're, you know, not being able to put the effort in to make sure that they don't get, you know, a high level of free throws. What adjustments are you making, especially with having your star player out to make sure that immediately you can fix that?
Sometimes you have to go way back to the boring basics, and
Mm,
you work on the boring basics of making
fair.
sure that you're in help defense, making sure that you're chucking a cutter, making sure that you help the helper, making sure that you communicate, because at this level, you're a professional and you should know those things, but I also throw out the fact that we're assuming that folks know the fundamentals on defense, but maybe they weren't necessarily coached on all of them or any of them, or their college experience on defense was a lot less than what they're being asked to do on the professional level. So you cannot assume that all 10, 11 players understand help the helper, you know, midline, force people baseline, whatever your defensive philosophy is for your coach and your staff. To me, that would be the place to start. The issue is that do you have time to do that?
Yeah.
Because you have games, what, at least two a week. And you also have to decide where your priority is going to be. Is my priority right now with Caitlin out going to be defense so that I can create more offense without her on the floor? If she were there, would my priority be on defense so much? Yes, but maybe not as much. So for me, that's what I would do if there were time, because there's just not a lot of time between games
Yeah,
anymore. But the other thing too is that again, in another 3 weeks, you're going to have seen pretty much everything everybody's going to do, and they'll spend the rest of the season just tweaking this, that, or the other in
yeah.
terms of what they do normally.
Yeah, you end up playing a team about 4 times a season, um, and that's not including if you end up getting to the Commissioner's Cup game, that's an extra thing that, you could end up playing another team, an extra time, and so, in the first game that you have with a team, all of this can happen, but, I mean, like I said, Indiana's gonna play Washington again early next week, so you have not too much time, but then you also have 3 more games potentially to fix you have, what you're trying to do here. So I agree with you that there's definitely not enough time when you think about their traveling. They have practice, there's days off, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but at the same time, you have more time because you're playing a team 4 times in a season, and the season is short, right? Like you're playing a team 4 times in the span of a few months. So I mean, hopefully by the second or third time, you kind of have a rhythm going of like, okay, this is what we need to do. This is what this team's going to throw at us. And I mean, there's also things like the All Star break that you can kind of take like a hit, like a hard reset, um, and try and work on those little things that you're talking about that you might not have time to work on during the regular season. So, yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to think, to have your perspective on that because I think a lot of the times we think about these players coming in, they're professional players, they're masters at what they do. They, have everything figured out. They know all the basics, but I think and not to throw it to men's basketball or anything, but like that's something that is an issue in men's basketball too is that we need to kind of scale back and come back to basics in order to fix some of the little problems that might be happening. So I mean it's such a interesting thing to hear about from a coach of, okay, we're talking about a professional team, but let's go back to what you're learning in camp, back in the day.
Well, you bring up a great point. No one's learning that in camp anymore. It used to
Mm.
be, and I'm gonna get on my soapbox here for a second.
Love it.
Camp used to be stations, and you would
Mm.
go from station to station, and you would play maybe 1 game, maybe 2 a day, that was the max. And now you have kids who are playing game after game after game after game after game, sometimes 3, 4, or 5 games in a day, but they're not learning a whole lot.
Mm.
They're not running complicated offenses. They're not learning offensive concepts. They're not learning defensive concepts that are foundational. And so when they get to a level like the professional, you just assume that,
Mhm.
but they don't always know that. And then also, they don't always know it with the group that they're put in there with. The rotations are different. When you have injuries, you're forced to change your rotation. And so then you have to get a rhythm with that group. And if it's not working as a coach, you have to try something else and insert player X, and so it does start with the knowledge of the game, but these young ladies are not getting the knowledge that you used to get from such a young age.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's this huge discourse happening right now, about how young they're starting to really get into like a competitive season when it comes to young basketball players, and the fact that they're not learning again like the fundamentals. They're not spending time, um, you know, learning these skills, and they're just throwing them into these game situations where, you know, obviously game situations are great, but then you also risk the fact of like injuries happening at a young age, getting to the point where, you're 18, 19 in college and you're getting these high level injuries because you've been playing every day or every week since you were 12, right? So like there's so many things to think about with how we are treating like younger players and how we're teaching them the game from, from the ground up. So I mean that's a whole other conversation,
I was
but
going
you
to
bring up
say, Chelsea, that is an entirely different podcast where I could really get on my soapbox.
Oh, and we could get into that in the weeks ahead, but I mean, yeah, it's such an interesting concept, especially, with someone like you who has that experience of teaching the young people the game and stuff. But yeah, it's very interesting to think about how that affects them 10, 15 years down the line now that we're talking about them as professionals. Yeah.
Yeah, and the smart ones will know what they don't know, and they'll get done what they need to get done. You saw case in point during the tournament Unrivaled, where you saw Lisa
Mhm.
Leslie working with Angel Reese. I mean, she's a kid that knows what she doesn't know, so she's
Mhm.
seeking consult from somebody who was one of the greatest post players ever.
Yep.
And so, if at that level, you're supposed to be able to monitor yourself and know what you need to do to get better, because, in a sense, it's costing you money if you don't improve.
Yeah, exactly. You risk, contract money being left on the table whenever you sign your contract. You risk, not being, scouted by these high level teams that want to sign you as a free agent. And I know we're only talking about Angel Reese as the example. She's in her second season. She has two more seasons with Chicago until she thinks about that stuff. But I mean, it's the basics now that she's building that will help her turn into a better player. So, I mean, if there are any young people out here watching, I guess take the advice to make sure that you're learning the basics. But I mean, yeah, this turned into such a fun conversation, and like I said, like
Another
I'm sure.
podcast later.
Yeah, exactly. We'll definitely try and plan a time to get into all of that a little bit more. But as always, Coach, thank you so much for chatting with me and answering all the questions I throw at you. Trying to like pick your brain as a coach. But I mean,
Sure.
if you're watching and you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe to the Her Hoop Stats podcast. Subscribe to our newsletter at herhoopstats.com. It comes into your email inbox every single day. And make sure to follow us over on X or Blue Sky or Instagram to make sure that you are, knowing when these podcasts are coming out every single day, Monday to Friday through the WNBA season. I'm Chelsea Late. This is Coach Helen Williams, and we will see you next time.